Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody today. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Your Retirement, and this is our fourth Tuesday interview with expert series. I am so delighted to have with me David Campbell. Let me tell you a little about David. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him in person at the Encore Summit that was held in Tempe, Arizona in November. And David, as I think most of you know from reading a little about him with the announcement of the call, David was one of the Purpose Prize winners. Each year, Encore.org has some Purpose Prize for people who are doing just remarkable things. And I think that you'll hear as we go on, it's going to become very clear why David was a recipient of it. And the Purpose Prize awards are sponsored by Symetra. I'm not sure I pronounced that, but Symetra, which is an insurance company. So David has been a technology executive, a corporate board member, and a humanitarian field volunteer. He was in Thailand. He went to Thailand immediately after the tsunami. Is that accurate that you went right after, or you were there?
Oh, no, I went right after OB. I was there 10 years ago today. So,
yeah. Well, 10 years ago today. Wow. So he went to Thailand immediately after the 2004 tsunami and became one of the founders of handsonthailand.org, which brought over 200 volunteers and several $100,000 to assist the rebuilding of 5 of the Phuket fishing villages. After Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, David joined with several other volunteers to establish Hands On USA. And after a week on the site, the team had operations in Biloxi, Mississippi, and 50 volunteers were committed and en route, and dozens of other projects were launched. In total, there are over 1,500 volunteers who've helped serve victims of Katrina. In 2010, the volunteer response model became known as All Hands Volunteers and now has executed over 40 projects in the U.S. and overseas. So David's going to discuss today some of the organizational story behind this, how he's developed it. And I do want to mention, too, there's a new book that is out in ebook form, Kindle form, called Being There, The Creation of a Cool, Happy, and Surprisingly Effective Disaster Response Organization. And I encourage people to read it. When David told me about it, I downloaded it, and it's really interesting. And we're going to hear a lot from David today. And he was telling me at the beginning of the call that he's actually in the process of writing an expanded version that's going to include a lot of stories about many of the volunteers. So I just want to remind you, please ask questions, make comments. I will integrate that into it. And David, why don't we start out by you telling us a little about what does your organization do, and maybe even start with what happened when you went to Thailand, and how did this all
Sure.
start happening?
And I would be really happy to get questions from anybody that has them all. I did, Dory, since we spoke back then, the book Being There, which is on Amazon, is also now available as a softcover book, so you can order it as either a Kindle book or as a softcover book, and be happy both to have people get it and happy to have them post a review after they read it. And also, just as we go along, for people who are online, the All Hands website is hands.org. And as we talk about things, there's extensive information about the organization there and history of projects and videos. The current places we're working literally is, I'll touch on the 10 years ago being in Thailand, but literally yesterday we had a team land in Malawi in Africa because there's extensive flooding going on in Africa. At the moment, we're active with an assessment team in Malawi, with a major rebuild activity in the Philippines, a rebuild activity in Brooklyn, still recovering more than 2 years after Sandy, and activity going on in Detroit. So just to give you an indication of the diversity of what we've grown to. The history of how I actually started All Hands comes a little bit from a blend of the corporate background, which was I was president of a company in Boston, in Cambridge, Mass, called Bolt, Baranek, and Newman, which was a company very involved in the development of the the internet. And when the tsunami happened in 2004, and 2 days after it happened, I was interacting with a friend that I had met in some of my board travels, and he commented when I mentioned the tsunami that 10 days earlier he had been in Phuket, Thailand, and he was having lunch on the patio of the Meridian Hotel in Phuket, and everyone on the patio of that hotel had been killed by the tsunami. And it was such a gripping statement that when I Googled tsunami in Phuket, and the Meridian Hotel chain presented that they had 3 hotels, 2 of them were closed, but one was open, and that one that was open had high-speed internet access. That specific fact and that conversation triggered in me the motivation that who else will be thinking about how to use the internet from the middle of what for me was the largest disaster that had ever happened in my lifetime. And so I had a board meeting in Berlin early in January, and I just made the decision that if I was there, maybe I would see and be able to do things that weren't happening otherwise. And so I communicated out to a set of friends that I was going to go, that I would put $15,000 in the pot. And the main message I had was, I'm going to be there and I'll spend it like it's my own. And if you want to put some money in with it, you'll know that you can trust me and that I'll do the right thing with it. And so that combination of things, but getting there was really crucial. And as often happens in life or in disasters, things develop in a way that you may not necessarily anticipate. And some of the things I did see that we would do, connecting, being able to capture the explanation of a need of a fisherman who lost his boat or a family who lost their home, and using the internet to communicate out what those levels of need were. But I did not anticipate that creating a base where people could come and help, that we would have this turnout of individuals that the industry refers to as SUVs, but spontaneous, unaffiliated volunteers. That is, people who see a need and just get an urge to help. And when we presented a website and gave them the opportunity that here's a place you can come that'll be organized and we'll have the right tools and we'll work with the community, and several hundred people ended up coming to that small base in Bang Tao, Thailand, and it was a very satisfying thing for everybody that was there.
In a sense, you're saying being there and setting it up and people came. So how did I hear in part that you would listen to stories and you'd hear what people know, but can you describe a little of how you began working with these spontaneous, I love
Sure.
that, SUVs, spontaneous volunteers?
Well, one of the things that it's always essential to connect into the community, but you do that oftentimes not by coming from the top, but by going in at the ground level. In my case, I ended up having time before I was going to leave, and so I started with actually talking to the manager of the hotel, the Meridian Hotel, and I learned that in these areas, the people who run a hotel know a lot about how to buy product, hire people, arrange transportation. They know how to get things done in their community. So the initial communications were there. I also spent time searching and found a news article about an American who had been in Bang Tao, the name of the village we went to, when the tsunami hit, and he was there to help open a small hotel that had gotten quite devastated by the tsunami. So he was basically out of work, and he tried to organize the local community to start helping themselves, start cleaning up, and he had gotten some coverage, so I contacted him, and that gave me a person to contact with and a place to go. Obviously, the weather in Thailand and Phuket is a beautiful tropical area, so we didn't have to worry about adverse weather, and one of the main things was just having people who lived there and would go out and talk to the community and say, I'm willing to do what you want us to do next. And in the initial phase of a disaster, often that's clearing debris, clearing trees that are blocking roads, getting people that have a chainsaw, and then eventually when we had a flow of volunteers coming in, we could ask volunteers to bring things with them that weren't always available in the local area so that we could expand our tool inventory and our skill inventory to some extent. But a lot of it is that, and I use that title of the book, Being There, because so much of what I find is necessary to be effective in this chaos of post-disaster response is being on site so you can actually see the need and you can talk to the people that are immediately affected. And I found that solutions in units of modest dollars, hundreds or thousands of dollars, were often available. And without thinking about it, we were prototyping the model of a ability to have decision-making at the scene immediately. So if we saw an immediate need, as for example, when I got there and saw that dozens of fishing boats had been destroyed, I found through village contacts the man who was built boats and said, okay, would you start building 3 boats right now? And he said, who will give me the money for the supplies? I said, I'll give you the money for that. He said, who are they for? And I said, I don't know yet, but by the time you're finished building them, we'll have figured out who they're for. Because it takes longer to build a boat than it would to interview the different fishermen and their families and capture their stories and explain those stories. And so part of it was the 40 plus years of corporate experience of organizing projects and knowing the flow of parallel activities that allow you to get to a specific result. And also talking to people connecting people who have an obvious need and people who are willing to help but don't necessarily come into direct contact with each other. For example, there was a major hotel resort near Bangkok called the Andaman Resorts, and it's 5 different hotel chains on a large 700-acre piece of land. And we met with the management of that facility. Now, these are business people who cared about the local community, but they raised funds from their staff and from their guests, but they didn't want to be picking out which fisherman or which family's house got fixed. But to the extent that we would live in the community and we would identify beneficiaries and capture their story and bring a portfolio of needs back to the business, they would then fund us to have the costs we needed to buy materials and so on to meet those needs. And it was an example of a ad hoc relationship that had corporate experience on one side and living in and listening to the community on the other side, and having this critical resource of the volunteers who came with a diversity of skills and a willingness to do whatever the community wanted us to do that would be most productive for them.
That is so impressive. It is such a beautiful example of how transferable so many skills are that we have, sometimes that we don't even think that we have. But it sounds like you were aware about the importance of the connection and engagement with people and listening to people's stories. And it's just a beautiful example of that. One of the questions that have come so far, it's going to take us a little into the background information, but I think it will be helpful as we go ahead. Bob from Arizona wondered if, had you retired, was there any time after you retired that you were unsure of what you wanted to do in the next phase? Evolved for you.
Sure. Yeah. So the quick, and again, if there's I actually have a personal website called davidncampbell.com, and there's got a full bio and a CV and all that jazz. But being a CEO of 2 different public companies, the last of those was in 2000, with a couple of other friends. I had started a small, what I call a boutique investment bank, a firm to help either raise money for technology companies or arrange mergers and acquisitions. And I was doing that, and I was on the board of 3 public companies at that time. And so that was my life. It was not being a full-time CEO, but still 100% full-time active. And what I found as I got engaged with what has become All Hands is that I gradually pulled back those activities. And those were things that I could do on a variable basis, if you will. And so I've actually went off just the last of those boards this past December 31st. So the mix of, I pulled out of the investment banking business over the next year or 2, and the blend of board activity and not-for-profit activity, actually I found pretty positive. The board activity gave me a reason to travel, and in some of the cases, Tektronix was a global company, so we would travel around the world for that board. And frankly, I could use that to pick up some of my time and costs of traveling. When we had projects in Indonesia, the Philippines, Bangladesh, and so on, I would often be able to combine some board travel with visiting all hands projects. So the 2 things worked together for me. I never really faced the decision of retirement, and I'm now 73, and I have brought in a successor at all hands, now going on 2 years. I still work at it full time, but it doesn't have the same intense daily demand as when I was executive director up through again, about maybe 18 months ago is when Eric Dyson joined us as my successor as executive director. I'm still chairman of the board and still very involved. So in direct answer, I never really faced that walking off the cliff and saying, I'm now retired and I now have to start doing. I started doing all hands while I was still fully engaged, and then let it fill up my life and let the other things get pushed to the side.
But it's a great example of that. That's part of that anticipating and planning ahead, that when people can do that and start building your life so it's not just based on the 1 or 2 or whatever kind of positions that you had, that it just opens you to these possibilities, which is what, it just sounds like there was this organic kind of way that this evolved.
Well, it did in a way. It partly is, I think volunteering is a great way for people anticipating retirement or in retirement to get engaged with a cause they care about. And I think people can think of volunteering as something you do half a day a week, but it can also be something you do almost full time. And I think part of it is just to have the comfort that you can separate economic need from how you choose to spend your time. And if you find a purpose or a cause that you're really excited about, then spending your time with it is very satisfying. And when I talk to many people on project, older or younger, it's think about the kind of people you want to spend time with. And the people at All Hands projects tend to be confident and caring about other people and willing to interrupt their life to go and help someone. And it's a wonderful bunch of people to be with. And so when you think of how you want to spend your time, often I think it's helpful. Think of different categories or groups of people. Where would you like to spend your time? And that can be one of the criteria for choosing.
Great. Back to Thailand for a minute, since that was the first place. And there, what you've said is that there were you ended up with around 200 or so.
Yeah, almost 300 volunteers came, yeah.
And you started out with your own money and then ended up getting funds from other people. So how did people learn about you? What were the kind of volunteers that came? Maybe just if you can paint the tapestry of what that was like, and what were the challenges for you just showing up and being there, and for them? It's just
some of the discoveries were that the set of people who will interrupt their life and travel to some place to help have a little bit of a different skill set maybe than normal. They're confident. They go there because they feel that they have something to bring. But looking back, I find that if you get a group of something like 30 or more people, they probably have across their capability, a broad range of skill sets. And so someone might know how to use a chainsaw, and someone else might know how to do a spreadsheet, someone else might know how to pour a foundation for a house. But once you get a certain set and say, does anybody here know how to do this, you find often that you'll have those skills. Also, if they don't, but you have access to some capital, you can find local people that have those skills and actually acquire them. But the being there part is, number one, a key thing for us was using the internet to put up a website that says, we're here, this is a place that you can come to volunteer. Just simply that fact allowed people who were searching to find us. That was an important first step. The second thing is being there and doing honest, productive work when people would make contact with us who were looking to help. Oftentimes we served in the role of a connector. That is, we were a direct connection between the obvious needs of the community that we understood because we lived there, and we could be transparent in terms of where the money was going to be used. And so I'll give you two, to me, extraordinary examples. We're living on the space in the small fishing village. One was, there's a very high-level 5-star resort complex called the Aman Resorts, and there was a local Aman resort. Guests would come over. Sometimes guests would come to see what we were doing and then often make donations, but they were contacted by the people out at Stein Erikson Lodge in Deer Valley, Utah, who, as many people across the world did, raised money to try to help the victims of the tsunami because it got such broad exposure. And they contacted Aman to see, now that we've raised the money, what's the most effective thing to do with it? And Aman knew us and recommended they come and visit with us, and they came and visited. And when they came and saw us face to face, and they saw that we weren't spending any money on ourselves or the volunteers, we were putting it into materials and into the community, they had raised, I think it was $54,000, and where they planned to give it to multiple organizations, they said, what you're doing is great, here's this money. I had another day when a gentleman, an Arab in flowing white robes, came by and said, we hear you're doing good work. Tell us about you. This was a Muslim community we were in. We talked about it. He said, what do you need? We gave him a list of things, tools and medical supplies we needed. And he came back the next day with 2 vehicles that brought all the supplies we had on our wish list. But he also, after sitting and talking with him for an hour about my background and what we were attempting to do, he reached down into his briefcase and slid an envelope across to me. In it were 125 $100 bills. It's $12,500 in cash. I'm not really used to dealing much with cash in our modern business world. And literally I went got on my motorbike and took it back, and we had this envelope with cash, which we then managed that cash out. But it was an example. He was the head of Kuwait Air for Thailand, and they wanted to help. They wanted to find a trustworthy way to help. And so in other projects since then, we find that being in a position to be a trustworthy connector to the clear needs of the community affected and be trusted by our donors, that connection is, we're not asking people for money. We're simply connecting people who want to help with a trustworthy way to help. When we ended up another tsunami in 2011, when the tsunami hit Japan, I landed in Tokyo 3 days after the tsunami happened, and we got into a community, became trusted, and ended up raising substantial, well over $1 million in Tokyo, mostly from the expat community, the U.S. or British firms that were based in Tokyo, and they wanted to help the affected communities, but they wanted to help in a way that they could feel was transparent and trustworthy. And since the ultimate transparency is saying you can come and work with us if you want. You can have your employees come work with us, or you can watch us on the website when we're running a project like the Philippines or Detroit or Brooklyn today. People can go to hands.org and literally get reports of the project, get photos from the project, get videos from the project. They can see what we're doing. They know what we're doing, and that often donors are just looking for what's a trusted connection so that I know that my money's going to help somebody in real need.
Those are wonderful examples. And so what would happen, because as you say, there are, a lot of different organizations that I guess position themselves to be there. How did you deal with that, and what enabled you? It sounds like you, and the person of you and your leadership and all is part of the trust building that occurred. But what were some of the challenges, or were there challenges of how to differentiate yourself, or how to figure out where to be in these different places so that people weren't stepping on each other's toes?
I ended up in Bangtao because of the coincidence of the lunchtime conversation that took me to Phuket and then the Meridian Hotel and so on. But when I was there and extended my stay a couple of times, I realized that this was not the highest impact area of the tsunami. In fact, other countries, Sri Lanka and Indonesia, had substantially more damage and more deaths than Thailand had, but I had gone to Thailand because I had this connection. And once I was there, we weren't even the most important affected area by the tsunami in Thailand. There was another community called Khao Lak where there were more people killed and there was more attention paid to it. So we were out of the news, and I realized that in Thailand, and I remembered that when we decided to launch our project after Katrina. And so where New Orleans was getting all the attention after Katrina, we deliberately chose to look for and go to what I would call a secondary impact area where the devastation was just as severe, the needs were just as great, but the attention was almost non-existent. And in retrospect, we call that now the Goldilocks test. When there's a major event, we try to find a community that's not too big, not too small, but just right. And just right means that it can absorb the full force that we'll be able to bring to it, but it's also of a size that will be a significant player in that market. And after Katrina, we averaged about 100 people. We peaked at over 200, but averaged well over 100 people on our base over that next period of time. I don't think we would have had the same impact in New Orleans where we might have been falling over other people, but we were the main player in Biloxi, and that was important to us. And similarly, after the Haiti earthquake in 2010, for example, Port-au-Prince was the capital, got most of the attention. We chose to go about 2 hours further west to a community called Léogâne, which was closer to the center of the earthquake's impact. Again, 80% of the buildings were destroyed, just as bad as Port-au-Prince, but it wasn't getting the same level of attention. And so we deliberately try to find a community that's matched to our capability so we can live in that community and the community will know us and accept us, and also we'll be able to have a strong impact on the community.
So how, if you could elaborate more on how, once you select which community, I know you had said when we were speaking that volunteers pay their own way there, and then how do you find places for people to stay, and what happens with food, and so that most of the emphasis can be on helping the place that you're helping in the disaster, but you also you're going to have this massive a group of people that you have to also provide for.
Yeah, it's really a three-step process, and we're in the first step of it in Malawi today, and I could talk about how we did it in Haiti or Japan or any of them, but the first step is you fly in and go to the capital in an international. So it's different, international and domestic. Right. So we could talk about each of those. But so if we talk about the international first, you first fly to the capital city. You can gather a certain amount of information there. The UN provides a certain coordination if a country asks for help after disaster. There's a group called UN OCHA, Organizing Committee for Humanitarian Affairs. They have a standard way of gathering data and some decent online information sources. We'll go there and capture information, which will basically lead you to the regional, the distribution of the impact across multiple regions. And you gather data, people killed, people injured, schools destroyed, homes destroyed, etc. That data starts to give you an idea of where you want to go. You next move into the closest regional city where you can have reasonable access to either a hotel or electricity or something, and set up an interim base there. And from there, you do day trips out to the heart of the actual affected communities. When you're going to the actual affected communities, you're really looking for two things. Which community are we going to choose? Oftentimes looking at the type of damage and the concentration of damage, but also at the same time looking for facilities in those communities that we might be able to convert into a base. So if an event happens on day one, we'll be in the capital city, say by day 3 or 4 or 5. We'll be in the regional city by day 7. We'll start hitting affected communities over the next 5 days. Pick one. And then we'll have about 2 weeks that we'll use to prepare our base to bring in our first waves of volunteers. And in that interim period of time, we're hiring local people that are going to provide transportation, drivers, vehicles, cooks. We're building out the base in terms of we'll put in very crude infrastructure. We'll normally be taking over what's basically an empty building, a warehouse, a restaurant that's been partially damaged or closed down, a large house, but we'll have to add bunk beds in Haiti, bunk beds for 100 people, for example, to sleep. In Japan, again, bunk beds and arranging with people to provide the services. And then we'll have told our volunteer base early on that we're going to do an assessment. We'll announce the start date of accepting volunteers, and by the time the first wave come, we'll have rudimentary housing and sanitation facilities, and we'll be able to feed them. And most importantly, we'll have organized work, and we'll have the right tools to do that work. And for a domestic project, really pretty similar. In the domestic, it's easier because we can actually bring our tools. We have a variety of equipment and vehicles stored in Kentucky, where our domestic woman, Sherry Baresh, who's in charge of our domestic response operations, lives, and we'll fly people to pick up those vehicles and move them to we've responded to the tornadoes in Oklahoma and Mississippi, Alabama, responded again to the flooding that hit Detroit, and we'll bring our own sets of tools and vehicles, and we'll have rudimentary housing in those vehicles for an initial assessment team. The domestics are quicker, but oftentimes the projects are shorter because there's other resources available to help domestically. But we'll get there quickly. We'll set up more quickly on domestics. And a domestic project might only be 6 weeks, or in the case of Detroit, we've been there now going on 6 months, and we're hoping we may be able to launch a rebuild project to be doing some additional construction in Detroit. So we'll see how that happens. That's what we're doing in Brooklyn right now. We're living in the basement of a church. I was there, slept there last week. So church opened their basement to us. We again built bunk beds, added showers, added capabilities to have housing for about 30 people. And we'll use that over the next 8 months to do a whole series of home rebuilds in the Canarsie section of out on Coney Island in Brooklyn.
Do a lot of the same volunteers come back, or do you find you get different?
Sure. Yeah, we have a great alumni base of volunteers. So again, on the domestics, you'll get day volunteers that'll be, if you will, disaster specific. And then we have an additional group of volunteers who will come in almost no matter where we do one. We have a person that schedules volunteers onto our projects, just like someone would schedule into a hotel. If you go online to hands.org and click to say, I'm interested in volunteering, you can submit your information, and then we'll get back to you and say, okay, we have space for your group of 4, these dates in March, but we don't have them in February, or we have them in April. And her job is to keep the bunk beds full so that the project directors know they've got a full workforce to match up against the tasks they've taken on. So we try to determine the size of the response we're going to have and how much capacity we'll need, and we'll build that capacity into whatever base we've been able to acquire.
And do you tend to get more younger people, or are there people 50 and over that volunteer? What's the kind of age range that you have?
So our record in Detroit, we just had a couple where the gentleman was 93 and his wife was 79. Wow. So that was pushing our limit. That was a bit. The distribution is that about 60% of our volunteers are under 30. So a large part of our volunteers are that younger group. We've had 10% are between 40 and 50, 56% are between 18 and 30. I'm looking at the actual data. 12% over 50. What we try to do is match people's job, what they want to do. Some of the people that come are very happy to be working on a school build program in Haiti. Some other people might prefer to go out and do assessment. So we've got a wonderful woman in this over 50 category, Sue Glassner, who's been on many of our projects, and she'll take on the job of being our principal assessor. She'll go out and meet with families to look at the damage done to their home or figure out what they need, capture that and bring it back, and then that allows that job to be put into our work queue so we can schedule the right skills and the right duration of the project and the right materials. So there are different tasks for people based on what they want to do. And the real skill of our field project people is to organize our volunteers and let the volunteers partially choose, but also match their skills against the tasks that we take on, but also only take on tasks that are reasonable for our volunteer population. Again, in the early phases of work, such as in Detroit, where there's massive flooding across the city, the first tasks in the early weeks are what we call muck and gut, getting all the damaged materials out of the house and then gutting the house. That is pulling off the rotten drywall and so on to get it down to the studs so someone can do a rebuild project. That doesn't take a lot of skills to teach someone how to do the muck and gut phases of our work. And so in those early days after a disaster, we can absorb dozens or hundreds of people to come and do that work. The latter phases of rebuild will try to tailor to have a different distribution of skills. But I use the example of when I was down in Biloxi of chainsawing with people, and that there are people who know how to chainsaw, and I would say there's people who are draggers. That is, people who carry away the stuff that's been sawed, but they allow the chainsaw operator to go twice as fast. And I'm a dragger. I don't consider myself a skilled chainsaw worker, but if I'm there, I can make another person twice as productive. And constantly, as we're working in our projects, we're trying to find that match of someone who's expert at a skill, someone who's basically capable, and people who are willing to do what they're asked to do and taught how to do it, and then they learn how to do it. And whether it's supplying cement to build a house in Indonesia or learning to run a nail gun out in a build project we had in Colorado, if someone is willing to teach you the skill and help you use it and watch you can pick up a simple skill, and those simple skills managed properly combine to create wonderful results.
What over the course of these different projects that you've had, what would you say would be the toughest projects that you've had, and what made it more challenging or tough?
We were in Bangladesh, where again we were the only non-Deshis I think people had ever seen, and there is no source of tools, so they have blacksmiths who make your tools. That was a bit of an extreme in that way. Haiti certainly was a challenge. Haiti as a country still has severe challenges. We just passed the 5th anniversary of the January 12th, 2010 earthquake in Haiti, and that was a difficult, probably the most difficult country environment I'd say we worked in. We managed through it and built 20 schools and over 1,000 family-sized water filters. We got a lot of work done, but that was a challenging one. Japan was probably the toughest to get initial acceptance, but we did, and once we did, we had a wonderful project there. They each have their own personality, and you mentioned the volunteers coming back, and so after Sandy, where we stayed a long time in Staten Island and Long Island, and now we're in Brooklyn, we've had groups that have come out a dozen times. We've got student groups from schools. I know Alfred State's done schools that have adopted us, and at the end of each month, they'll have these kids sign up and come for a weekend. They'll leave on a Thursday afternoon and get there Thursday night and work all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then drive home Sunday evening. That'll give them a real work experience and a real exposure to need. And I actually would say that we're approaching our 30,000 volunteers that have worked on one of our projects. And the ability to give people the real world experience of living in communities of great need, whether it's in a Hurricane Sandy affected part of Brooklyn or a tsunami affected part of Japan or the earthquake affected part of Haiti. Allowing our volunteers to see the communities and see the extraordinary levels of need changes their life, and in many of them actually causes them to pursue a career of spending more time in a humanitarian space and going back to get a degree in international development. And one of the great satisfactions for me has been the dozens and hundreds of people who've chosen to modify their life plan to either to make it a full-time pursuit or to incorporate it into the blend of their life so that they plan to spend several weeks or several months a year on our projects and blend that into a more traditional life plan.
So it sounds like both, if there's a parallel that hits me as I listen to you, that part of how this all began was going and creating a space and finding the need and, as you say, being there. And in a way, for the volunteers, it's like inviting them to also open up a space in their life to create a space to be there and give back or be valuable and connect and be part of community. It's wonderful.
It's a cool thing. I did not to throw in a plug, but I did I don't know if people know what a TED Talk is, but I did a TED Talk last year, and it's, if you go to TEDx and use my name, you can find it. It was a short, but impactful in terms of what it means. And to me, these people who are willing to, again, our model is simple. They have to pay their own way to get there. We don't charge people anything to live at our base, whether they stay for a week or 6 months. But it gives people an exposure into the need, and they find that they can accept responsibility very quickly, and that they're living in a community of people that have an extremely strong sense of purpose, and that's where they want to be. And the number of people who've come for a short time but then extend and then extend again find that they can blend this into their life, and that it actually brings a different kind of meaning and impact to their life is extraordinarily important to me. Frankly, it's one of the reasons why getting the Purpose Prize was so important to me, because purpose, I think, is really a driving word for the volunteers and the people who come to our projects.
And I think, as I said at the beginning when I introduced you, I think it becomes so evident of how and why you became one of the recipients of the Purpose Prize, because it really is, it's very inspirational. I have a number of questions now that
Sure.
3 are, I think, from the same person who didn't identify him or herself, but let me start with them, and then there's some others too. I think you partly answered this, but a little bit maybe more in depth. How involved are you in the on-site activities these days? That was the first of this person's questions.
On-site?
Yeah, being there yourself.
Okay, not very much. What I find in it's clearly a major message in the book is that if you're going to start a not-for-profit, the major activity you're going to be involved in is raising money. And most of my activity, even over the past 5 years, has been focused more on the fundraising side. In the past fiscal year, we would have raised about $4 million, most of that privately funded. And that's a constant activity. And I look and say, okay, my relative skills as a chainsaw helper or as a fundraiser, I'm better off telling the story and being on the fundraising side. I try to visit all the projects. I'll be in the Philippines next month. My wife and I will go there. We've been married for now over 50 years, but she's been to basically all of our international projects, and she'll work and I'll talk, basically. So I'll try to visit all the projects, but I don't look at myself as being frankly a productive worker as much as trying to understand partner relationships or business relationships or funding relationships.
So really using the skills that you have, which ties into another one of the questions from the same person, which is, what are you doing for ongoing fundraising to keep the organization running?
We try to do everything. We've gotten very active lately in trying to get corporations to see us as a vehicle for their employee social responsibility engagement. In Brooklyn, we had a number of companies that we encouraged to bring out teams of employees on the basis that when their employees saw the connection to the work, that those corporations would then support us. And so we've had people like Southwest Airlines now provides air travel for us based on the fact that we've had large numbers of Southwest employees come and volunteer with process. We work hard at trying to identify and be introduced to foundations that have an interest in either disaster response, which isn't that typical, but if someone's interested in education, we'll find, or dealing with poverty, we'll present the work we're doing in these affected communities as how they deal with that area of interest. Third, we do a good job in our communications on our website, and at the website we have a copy of our annual reports and all of our financials, and we've worked very hard, for example, to have the highest possible ratings from the different, so we have a 4-star Charity Navigator rating and the highest ratings from the GuideStar and Better Business Bureau. But it's a constant effort. I mean, frankly, one of the things that happens in the disaster business, if you will, is the people who are interested in, for example, this Hurricane Sandy impact in New York are not necessarily interested in Detroit. People who are interested in Haiti may not be interested in the Philippines, where in most businesses that I've been involved in, if you do a great job for your current customer, they're going to be a customer next year. If we do a great job for our current donors, like we did after Sandy, they say great, but they may not have an interest in helping in a disaster in a different place. People's interest in disasters is quite parochial. So we're working hard to understand our donors' interests and those that we can carry on to fund other disasters, great. Those that may be interested only in the specifics of a local area, fine, but we have to make sure we can get our story in front of them very quickly after a disaster happens and we're on site.
One of the things I recall reading in your book, and I may not have the sequencing of it, but part of the having now these two organizations, one international and one domestic-based, is realizing that so many of the donors were going to be more on this side of the continent.
So yeah, when we went after our initial projects after Biloxi, we're in the Philippines, then Indonesia, then Peru, and then Bangladesh, and we were really moving into the international. But since our funding basically all comes from either the U.S., Canada, or the U.K. for practical purposes, I felt we needed to have a strong presence across many domestic needs. And so it really started in 2008. There was major flooding out in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and we really pursued that as a very large project, ended up having 2,000 volunteers, actually, 1,500 of them from the community that we organized and coordinated and equipped, and 500 people who came and lived at the base we established over the time we were there. So that was since Biloxi, that was our large domestic, and then we followed that model and done it when we've responded in Oklahoma. Or Sandy was a big D. We look at a 2x2 matrix of disasters as domestic or international, big D or small d, and events like Sandy and the Haiti earthquake are big Ds, whereas events like the flooding in Detroit, although it affected hundreds of thousands of people, we would identify as a small d because it just doesn't stay in the news for long. And so it's not going to get broad donor interest. We're going to have to find people who are directly concerned about those affected communities to be able to get funding support from them.
Mm-hmm. And another question from the same person. As you began expanding, how did you build up to having a staff who, as she says, she assumes are paid? How did the organizational structure develop, and where is it now?
One of the amazing things about a volunteer-based organization is that all your volunteers effectively become candidates to move up into the organization. When we went to Biloxi, we had one paid employee, a young man who'd been with me in Thailand, and we talked. He wanted to do it, so we started with $1,000 a month employee for the first several months of the organization. Now we probably have about 50 people on the payroll. About a dozen of them are basically permanent, and the other 38 are project-based. So when we have a large project like the Philippines, we'll bring people into multiple roles, and we'll bring them on for 1 to 6 months. So someone might be managing construction project. There might be 3 or 4 people working for them that are program managers of different programs. The compensation levels are still, we think, obviously below commercial levels. I had talked with my successor who left a very substantial corporate job to take an 85% pay reduction to take our job because he wanted to be in this space. And our pay levels starting at the bottom when we're running on a project and we have a volunteer who would like to become part of staff, our entry-level positions are as low as $800 a month, but for someone living on the project, that allows them to take on some responsibility and commit, and then it moves up to about $2,000 a month for a project director. So we'll have someone managing 50 to 100 volunteers and running a $100,000 a month budget. That might be a $2,000 a month position. So I think we're still frugal in terms of our compensation, partly because I want to be very respectful of the volunteers. I was always unpaid because I could afford that. But our blend of resources, still a large number of volunteers for the bulk of our workforce, and then experienced former volunteers that make up the critical level of on-project support, and now I think a quite professional level of what we'd call corporate people who've really, almost in the Encore.org movement, have chosen as a second career to do something that they're doing for the purpose of it, not mainly for the compensation of it. And that really makes up the core of our permanent staff.
Mm-hmm. I'm just taking it in. It's just evolved, and it's such a great example of how over this 10-year period, really, it's become this whole network for you that has this international and domestic component. What started with one location has skyrocketed.
But then the business model is that the international needs are interesting, but the domestic needs are also, and there's the synergy between having an active presence. So that one of the things I decided several years ago, and we're effective at it now, is that we need to always have projects going on. We're not like the volunteer fire department that goes back home and waits for the next time the bell rings, partly because we want to always present volunteer opportunities to our current and future volunteers, but we also want to stay active in front of our donors. That led us 5 years ago, based on a donor's willingness to fund a school construction project, that Haiti was the first time that we stayed after the initial, I'll say, first 6-month response period after a disaster, and we launched a rebuild program in Haiti where we ended up building 23 classroom schools, 20 schools with 3 classrooms each. And we were able to learn to do that successfully. That led us in the Philippines to launch a rebuild project that's still going on in Sandy to stay and do rebuild. And we'll be doing rebuild in Brooklyn all the way through, I think, next October. And the reason for that is that, it's a stable set of activity. The need is driven by the disaster. It allows us to present a future flow of volunteer opportunities so volunteers can schedule their time. But crucially important, it allows us to constantly stay active in the donor community saying, come and see what we're doing. Come to Brooklyn and see what we're doing. Come to the Philippines. I mean, we've been very open about it. I'm going to be in the Philippines in February. Eric Dyson, the executive director, is going to be there in March to go out to any donors or anyone who's really interested and say, come and be there. Come and see what we do. And happy to have people travel with us. The strategy is very much driven by a need to have, as we can, predictable, sustainable funding. And when we have those 50 people engaged, again, many of them in rebuild activities right now, when an event happens like Malawi or an event happens, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if we have to do an assessment of flooding in Boston after the blizzard today, to be serious.
I was wondering. I was wondering about that.
That we'll look and determine, is there enough that we would consider doing a domestic response project here? It's possible. We'll watch it and we'll see what the actual flood impact is.
So what you're also saying is that for anybody interested in being part of it, by going to your website, it could be almost at any place or any time because there's something always at work kind of thing. Which
and that's really strategic. And my goal is that we always have a domestic project ongoing and we always will have an international project ongoing. And the only way you can guarantee doing that is to have a longer tail on your projects. And the way to do that, in our estimation, is to do rebuild activity. And rebuild activity is interesting. For example, after Haiyan, the typhoon that hit the Philippines in November of 2013, November 8th, I think, there were 1 million homes severely damaged or destroyed. That's almost the total number of homes in the state of Massachusetts, for example. And it's just an extraordinary number of homes. Now, we've built hundreds of what are called transitional shelters, but these are $2,000 units, which is a raised wooden frame and a what's called nipa, the local material from the trees that goes onto the frame and the roof, and so it gets a family out of tent cities and into homes that have no plumbing or power, but they're basically transitional shelters that people can live in until the country comes along with permanent replacement homes. But permanent replacement home projects are long, takes longer time to acquire the land, and so on and so forth. So it might be 5 years before permanent shelters are built. Part of our role is to get there and see if we can do something to help provide adequate, safer transitional shelters, and that's a good example of what we've been doing in the Philippines the past year plus.
Mm-hmm. Which is the other part that I really like about it, too, is that you're not just going there and leaving, but there's an ongoing connection where you've been helping people with the idea that disasters don't just go away overnight. There's this ongoing set of needs and problems that you're responding to.
Disasters have tremendous economic impact in a community. I mean, many times people will have lost, number one, all their possessions. They've probably lost their home, and they may have lost their job. And so people are really in a tenuous state in the immediate aftermath. And so part of our objective is to get people on the ground there, helping them so that they start to see a path forward. That tasks that would overwhelm a single person or a single family, when 15 people show up to help them with it, they can then take on that task of clearing the rubble where their home used to be, and now they have a space anyway to the idea of starting a temporary shelter or starting construction. But a tremendous amount of it is psychological, and the commitment of individuals who've interrupted their own life to come and help somebody is a psychological boost that I think is as valuable as anything we do. I talk to people about the three things we do. One is the physical work, like having built a school or rebuilt a home. The second is the psychological impact on these communities is powerful. And the third is the impact on the volunteers themselves when they realize that they have the capability to go and combine with others and do useful work that changes someone's life at a moment in time when they really need help. And in our quote, connected world, we're connected with iPhones and the internet, but there's still a tremendous benefit to connecting people to people and having people know who they're helping, and seeing a family who has so little come out at the end of the day with lemonade or having cut a coconut to share with you because that's all they have to share with you. These are very powerful moments for our volunteers and for those communities. It's a good thing.
I do hear that. The three words that keep popping in my head are hope, resilience, and gratitude, and the connection between people. I see this through my work too, that when people take time with somebody and really want to hear their story and help them, it's a sense that they're not invisible anymore, that they're valuable. And so that's part of what your organization is doing, is helping people through the mirroring, in a way, of your volunteers recognize that they're important people to be helped and not to give up on themselves. So that's really striking me. I wanted to ask, there is another question I'm going to come back to that one of the listeners asked, but I know that it's not unusual sometimes when one person gets taken with a cause or an encore career, that it's not always something that ends up being in sync with other family members. And I know you mentioned your wife's there, and I just wondered if you could speak a little to how you've helped it be something that, or if you ended up having to do anything consciously, or it just emerged that, because I know that you had mentioned to me that so many of your family members are involved, and I think it just represents a wonderful model for people of how to not have yourself just be off separate, but have others supporting you.
If you find a cause that you really feel passionate about and you're willing to give yourself to it, that by itself is a pretty good model for other people to have. My wife made the comment when I was staying in Thailand the second or third time that she didn't know she had married a monk, but she then, I think, decided, okay, if I'm going to do this, she might as well come along. And so she came down to Biloxi, and then, as I said, has been on multiple other projects. My daughter April and her husband Chris celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary at our project in Haiti. My grandson Aiden is leading some 4 of his fellow high school will-be seniors down to our Brooklyn rebuild site. I ended up having 17 members of our sort of extended family all down in Hurricane Sandy area, the Thanksgiving that was just 4 weeks after Sandy hit, and we just worked all day mucking and gutting houses, and the little kids helped where they could, and I think it was a great Thanksgiving for everyone because they realized they were doing something that had an impact on someone else. The family certainly has embraced it and encouraged it and supported it, and that's a good feeling for me. It's good for me to let them know that there's a balance of things in life, and this is something that's important to me, and it's certainly had enthusiastic support from my whole family.
Which is wonderful. Do you find volunteers often come? Do most come by themselves, or do some come with families, or
a lot to come by themselves. One of the things that's been, to me, surprisingly wonderfully effective is the combination of parent-child. A mother-son come down because they can travel together. They don't have to go on the actual tasks they do during the day together, and they can be together in the evening or not. They can, we've had several cases of 3 generations of one family come, a grandmother, mother, and daughter. And again, they go their sort of separate ways, but then come back together and have shared experiences. But lots of examples of our age limits are generally 16 and over, 16 with an adult, or 18 and over without an adult. Family groups that have come like that, I think, have been particularly impactful.
Mm-hmm. I have a question which is going to take us a little off potentially in another direction, and maybe not, and then we'll come back. But excuse me, again, Bob from Arizona wondered that with your having sort of an exit strategy and naming a successor for hands.org, he said it sounds like you're looking at the next phase in your life, or are you, is I guess part of the question. And do you have another new project in mind, or where are you in terms of your life journey?
Yeah. So I guess to some extent, number one, just good corporate planning is you always have to have a succession plan. And 5 years ago, when I guess after Haiti particularly, when I believed we had proven that the model was effective and needed to survive for forever, if you will, then I started working at what was the corporate structure that we could fund on an ongoing basis, and where were the right people to lead that. So I would have started that process now probably 2.5 years ago, ended up with 18 months ago with the guy that I think is a good guy to that. I will still have All Hands be probably my major activity through being chair of the board, at least for several more years. I've also gotten involved with an organization in Boston called New England International Donors, which is now a group of over 100 people who are particularly interested in the international needs, and its website is neidonors.org, NEID being the name of the organization. And there's a lot to be gained from people who are, for example, trying to, focus their philanthropy on Africa and having shared experiences in terms of what they've learned, what worked, what didn't work, how to create partnerships among organizations. NEED has created an Ebola fund, for example, so the people who are interested in trying to help with the Ebola response can have a common funding vehicle, and then that vehicle creates an opportunity for potential recipients of funds to come and explain what they're going to do. NEED is something that I'm going to spend more time on going forward. I am looking at putting this, getting this next book done, which I think we will title, without giving it away, the Good for Nothing Club. And it's basically a twist on the phrase, because our volunteers represent people who are willing to do good for nothing. And I think I think that's a major activity that'll take me through the summer. And we incorporated the weekend of Katrina, so this September 6th is our official 10th year anniversary. And so this that's a major focal point. When I get past that, I think All Hands is going to keep me engaged, candidly, for the rest of my life. It's such a diverse set of challenges and needs and interests and skills, and the communities we affect, we get connected to. So I'm looking at my desk and seeing hundreds of hours of work to be done with the stuff that's on my desk. So I know I'm not going to run out of things to do, and I honestly don't think I'm going to run out of energy to do them. So far, it looks like a good balance.
And it sounds like you're doing such great things with that. And you really are inspirational of this notion of healthy, active, vital aging, where you're using the skills that you've developed over a lifetime of work and giving back to the world. It's really very inspiring. Actually, Meg from Massachusetts says, greatly inspiring and informative presentation. And she says, I hope I can volunteer before I'm 93.
You can wait and push the record.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
I mean, partly the whole Encore movement, this whole rethink retirement kind of thing, is another area that I'm anxious to help any way that I can. I'm happy to go and speak to people if there are people that think that's valuable. I was the commencement speaker at Alfred last fall. Symetra, the people that actually put up the Purpose Prize, was a nice award, but it also came with $100,000 from Symetra, the company that funded it, which I donated to All Hands. And so I'll be out there speaking in March, and I think trying to help people understand how they can become effective in this not-for-profit space by being, I think, an aggressive and responsible volunteer. And that may mean taking on more responsibility than one would initially think they want. but there's a balance point between being, I guess I'll use the harsh word, a dilettante volunteer, and really being willing to take on serious responsibility. And I think people can make a decision. It's okay to say, I want to be a mentor 2 hours a week for someone. That can be great. It's a different thing to say, I'm willing to take on a serious responsibility in an organization that takes advantage of your time, your skills, and what you have available. And with people now starting to look at second careers as in their 50s, there's a lot of time to give. And I think it's important for people to try to pursue different volunteer activities as a way of sampling different organizations and finding what size organization, what cause, what level of commitment, and experimenting to find the right fit. I think that'll increase people's chances of satisfaction and therefore success.
I think that can't be underscored too much, and I think it is so important. And just thinking about, I do a lot of work with people in the second half of life, as do many people on the call, as well as I think many people on the call are in the second half of life. So to really recognize that there's so much more out there, and I liked what you said before too, that it's really helpful to begin to think and start that volunteering now, whatever age you are, if you haven't been doing it before, or just to sample what's out there so that it gives you some idea of what direction you might want to move into. Ties into sort of the focus that we're going to be having next month on the darker side of retirement. And often the darker side of retirement is when people leave a job where they feel the connection, the engagement, the purpose and meaning, the structure, and don't look to what they're retiring to, and then spiral down into depression. You're just such a wonderful role model of, as you say, you have enough to keep you busy through the rest of your life, which is busy, not just busy, but vital and busy and connected and responsible and good busy.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Any last sort of takeaways? In a sense, your whole talk has been a lot of wonderful takeaways, but last thoughts about your project, your program, or the volunteering part that would be good for people to hold on to as they leave today?
No, again, I'd be happy to have people. I don't care about people buying the book for the sake of buying it, but the book's being there and it's on Amazon, and you can watch for a follow-up. Hands.org is the website. That's, I think, really people have done a great job of creating that as a wonderful communications platform. My email is simply david@hands.org, so if anybody wants to get in touch with me, that's a pretty easy way to do, and happy to be responsive to anything. And I think it's probably just the Nike phrase, just do it. The volunteering thing is something you really learn about by doing, and I think getting engaged puts you in a different circle of people who then in turn might lead you to the next thing that's right for you. But if you don't try it, you'll never know. And I think just doing it, giving it a try, I find is great. And I think that's what I would encourage people, is to you don't wait forever. Do something and you'll learn from the doing it.
Thank you. This has just been very inspiring, and I really want to thank you on this very blizzardy, snowy day in New England to be with us and to share just both what the wonderful person you are, but what you've been able to do by being, as you say, aggressive and responsible in your volunteering, and then helping to establish this network and program that enables everybody from all walks of life, it sounds, to be able to be part of it in some way or another. And I do, as I mentioned at the beginning, in case people came on late, I have gotten David's book, and I really recommend it because he goes in more depth. And as he said at the beginning when I was talking to him right before the call started, he's been very honest. So he's really talking about the difficult challenges and the almost going broke at times and the pulling it together and much of what he's done. So I really recommend either the ebook or the softcover edition. And I'm looking forward, David, to reading your more expanded one with all of the other stories in it too. So thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you all for being here and being part of it.
Thanks, Dory. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed it. Take care.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.